Hi, I'm Jordan Lee, and I thought I was prepared for a simple promotion meeting. As I presented my ideas, a few colleagues chuckled and exchanged glances. I forced a smile, trying to hide my frustration, while my manager leaned back, skeptical. I left the office that evening feeling small, but when I checked my phone later that night, everything changed in a way I never saw coming. I had worked at that marketing firm for 6 years of early mornings, late reports, and weekends spent answering emails that could have waited until Monday. I believed hard work would eventually speak for itself, that someone would notice. That morning, I wore my best blazer and rehearsed my pitch in the bathroom mirror 3 times. I wanted that senior strategist position more than I had wanted anything in a long time. The conference room felt colder than usual when I walked in. My manager, Derek, sat at the head of the table with 2 department leads I barely knew. They barely looked up from their laptops when I entered. I set up my presentation slides, my hands steady but my pulse racing underneath. I reminded myself I had earned this moment through years of consistent results and countless projects delivered on time. I began speaking about my vision for the department's growth. I had spent weeks refining those ideas, analyzing data, identifying gaps no one else seemed to notice. About 5 minutes in, I heard it, a quiet snicker from the corner. I glanced over and saw 2 colleagues whispering, one of them smirking. Derek's expression remained flat, unreadable. I kept talking, but my confidence had already cracked. The questions they asked felt designed to diminish me. Derek interrupted twice to correct minor points that didn't matter. One of the department leads checked her phone openly while I spoke. By the time I finished, I knew the answer before anyone said it. Derek thanked me for my enthusiasm, but explained they were looking for someone with a more strategic mindset. I nodded, gathered my things, and walked out without another word. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. The humiliation wasn't new. I had faced out before, but this felt different. I had genuinely believed I was ready. I had pictured myself in that role, imagined telling my mother I had finally made it. Instead, I was sitting in a parking garage, mascara threatening to run, wondering if 6 years meant nothing at all. My apartment felt emptier than usual that evening. I dropped my bag by the door and didn't bother turning on the lights. I made tea, I didn't drink, and stared at the wall, replaying every moment from that meeting. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late while others left, all the recognition that went to louder voices. I wondered if I had been foolish to expect anything different. Around 9 o'clock, I finally picked up my phone. I had ignored it all afternoon, too drained to face messages or notifications. There were a few texts from my sister asking about dinner plans and some work emails Then I saw an email from a name I almost didn't recognize, a lawyer from a tech acquisition firm I had contacted months ago. 2 years earlier, I had started building something on the side. It began as a simple productivity tool, an app I designed for myself to organize creative projects and track client work. I wasn't a professional developer, but I had taught myself enough to build something functional. Friends started asking to use it, then their friends, and slowly it grew into something with 15,000 active users. I had never taken it seriously as a business. It was my quiet project, the thing I worked on at midnight when the real job felt suffocating. I had reached out to a few companies months ago, half-heartedly exploring whether anyone might want to buy it. Most never responded. I assumed the idea had died quietly, like so many other dreams I had shelved over the years. The email was 3 paragraphs long. I read it once, then again, then a third time because the words refused to make sense. A tech company had reviewed my platform and wanted to acquire it. They were offering $4.2 million for full ownership, pending a brief due diligence process. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. I called my sister immediately. She answered on the second ring, annoyed because she thought I was canceling dinner again. When I read her the email, she went completely silent. Then she screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She demanded I check if it was a scam, then cried when I confirmed the law firm was legitimate. I cried too, standing alone in my dark kitchen. The next few hours felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. I paced my apartment, reading the email over and over. I thought about Derek's dismissive expression, the snickers from my colleagues, the years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into spaces that never wanted me. All that time, I had been building something real without even realizing its worth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch watching the city lights through my window, thinking about every choice that had led me here. The app had started as an escape, a way to feel creative when my job made me feel invisible. I had poured my real ideas into it, the ones I never shared at work, because I knew no one would listen. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine and walk back into that office like nothing had changed. I emailed Derek a brief resignation letter, professional but firm. I thanked him for the opportunity and wished the team well. I felt no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet certainty that I was finally finished waiting for permission. My mother called when she heard the news. She'd always worried about my practical choices, gently suggesting I find something more stable than marketing. When I told her about the acquisition, she went quiet for a long moment. Then she said she always knew I had something special in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. I believed her. The due diligence process took 3 weeks. I met with lawyers, accountants, and executives who treated me like someone worth listening to. They asked detailed questions about my development process, my user growth strategy, my vision for the product's future. For the first time in years, I spoke about my ideas without apologizing or minimizing them. The day the deal closed, I was sitting in a coffee shop near my old office. I watched people in suits rushing past the window, clutching phones and coffee cups, chasing promotions that might never come. I had been one of them for so long. I had measured my worth by titles and approval from people who never truly saw me. I thought about the colleagues who had laughed during my presentation. I didn't hate them. I understood them. They were stuck in the same system I had escaped, competing for scraps of recognition while their real talents stayed hidden. I hoped someday they would find their own way out, their own midnight project that reminded them who they really were. The money changed my life, but not in the ways I expected. I paid off my student loans and bought my mother a new car. I invested most of it carefully, knowing that security mattered more than luxury. What changed most was how I saw myself, not as someone waiting for approval, but as someone capable of creating her own path. 6 months later, I started a new company. This time, I built it from the beginning as something meant to grow. I hired 3 people who reminded me of myself, talented, overlooked, hungry for a chance to prove themselves. I promised them I would never make them feel small for having big ideas. I still think about that promotion meeting sometimes. The sting has faded, replaced by something closer to gratitude. That rejection pushed me toward a door I had been too afraid to open. Derek's skepticism, the whispered jokes, the flat dismissal, they all became part of a story I now tell with pride. My sister jokes that I should send Derek a thank you card. I laugh, but part of me understands what she means. He gave me the final push I needed to stop asking for permission and start trusting myself. I wonder if he ever thinks about the woman he passed over, the one who walked out quietly and never came back. I learned that the world doesn't always reward patience or loyalty. Sometimes, you have to build your own table instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's. The side hustle I almost abandoned became the thing that set me free. I just needed to believe it was worth something before anyone else did. If you're reading this and feeling invisible, please know it doesn't last forever. The thing you're building in secret, the dream you work on when no one's watching, it matters. Keep going, even when the conference room feels cold. Your moment is coming, and when it arrives, you'll be ready. The first year of running my own company taught me things no corporate job ever could. I learned that freedom comes with weight, that every decision lands on your shoulders alone. I hired slowly, fired once, and cried in my car after both. The money in my account felt less like security and more like responsibility. I was building something real, and real things demand everything you have. My small team worked out of a converted warehouse downtown. We had exposed brick walls, secondhand desks, and a coffee machine that broke every other week. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Every morning I walked through that door, knowing that whatever happened next was something I had chosen. That feeling never got old, even on the hardest days. Elena was my first hire, a developer who had been laid off from a startup 3 months earlier. She was quiet, intense, and wrote cleaner code than anyone I had ever met. She didn't talk much about her personal life, but I noticed she always stayed late and never complained. I recognized something in her. That hunger to prove herself to a world that kept overlooking. Our product was evolving into something bigger than I had originally imagined. What started as a productivity app was becoming a full platform for independent creators to manage their businesses. Freelancers, artists, small agency owners. They were finding us through word of mouth, signing up faster than we could onboard them. The growth felt exciting and terrifying in equal measure. 3 months into our second year, I received an email that made me stop breathing. Derek, my former manager, wanted to meet for coffee. He said he had been following my success and wanted to congratulate me, and I read the message 4 times, searching for the angle, the hidden request, and find one, which somehow made it worse. I almost deleted it. My finger hovered over the button for a full minute before I closed my laptop instead. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Not of Derek himself, but of who I might become in front of him. I had worked so hard to leave that wounded version of myself behind. Elena noticed something was wrong before I said a word. She brought me coffee without asking, and sat across from my desk, waiting. I told her about the email, about Derek, about the promotion meeting that had changed everything. She listened without interrupting, then asked a question I wasn't expecting. She asked what I was hoping he would say. I didn't have an answer. Part of me wanted an apology, some acknowledgement that he had misjudged me. Another part wanted him to see my success and feel the sting of his own mistake. But underneath all of that was something quieter, a small voice wondering if his approval would finally make me feel like I had truly made it. I agreed to meet him that Friday. I chose a coffee shop far from my old office, somewhere neutral where the memories couldn't ambush me. I arrived 15 minutes early and ordered black coffee I didn't plan to. My hands were steady, but my heart was performing a drum solo against my ribs. Derek walked in looking exactly the same, pressed shirt, confident stride, that practiced smile he used in client meetings. He spotted me immediately and crossed the room with his hand extended. I shook it firmly, surprised by how ordinary he seemed. The man who had once made me feel so small now looked like just another tired professional chasing something he couldn't name. He started with small talk, asking about my company and complimenting my growth number. I answered politely, giving him the surface version of my story. I watched his face for signs of jealousy or regret, but found only genuine curiosity. It confused me. I had spent 2 years imagining this moment, and none of my fantasies matched this strange, civil reality. 20 minutes in, he finally said what he came to say. He told me he had made a mistake passing me over for that promotion. He said he had been under pressure from leadership to choose someone with a more traditional background, and he hadn't fought hard enough for me. He apologized without making excuses, and his eyes stayed steady on mine. I didn't know what to. The apology I had wanted for so long was sitting in front of me, and it felt smaller than I expected. It didn't erase the humiliation of that conference room or the months of self-doubt that followed. It was just words from a man who had made a choice and now regretted it. That was all. I thanked him for saying it. I meant it, even though the words felt strange in my mouth. I told him I had made peace with what happened, that it had pushed me towards something better. He nodded like he understood, though I suspected he couldn't fully grasp what that rejection had cost me before it became a gift. He asked if I was hiring. The question landed like a small bomb between our coffee cups. He explained that the firm was restructuring, that his position wasn't as secure as it once was. He had seen what I was building, and wondered if there might be room for someone with his experience. I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. I told him I would think about it. It was the most honest answer I could give in that moment. Part of me wanted to say no immediately, to let him feel even a fraction of the rejection he had handed me. But another part recognized that revenge was a cage I didn't want to live in. I drove home that afternoon with the radio off, letting the silence hold space for my thoughts. I thought about power and how it shifts without warning. 2 years ago, Derek controlled my career trajectory with a single decision. Now, he was asking me for an opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the weight of what came next. Elena asked about the meeting on Monday morning. I told her everything, including his request for a job. She raised an eyebrow but didn't comment right away. Then she said something that stayed with me for weeks. She said hiring him would tell my team more about me than any mission statement ever could. I spent the next few days thinking about what kind of leader I wanted to be. Building a company wasn't just about products and profit margins. It was about creating a culture that reflected my values. If I hired Derek out of spite, I would poison everything I was building. If I rejected him for the same reason, the result would be identical. I called him on Thursday and offered him a consulting role. Not full-time, not permanent, but a chance to prove himself on a project-by-project basis. I explained that my company operated differently than what he was used to. Flatter hierarchy, more accountability, no room for politics. He accepted without negotiation. His first project was harder than I expected, not because of the work itself, but because of how it stirred up feelings I thought I had buried. Seeing him in my space, following my lead, taking direction from people he once would have ignored, it was disorienting. I had to remind myself daily that growth sometimes looks like forgiveness. Alina warmed to him slowly, which surprised me. She started inviting him to team lunches and asking his opinion on client strategy. One afternoon, I overheard them laughing about something, and I felt a knot in my chest loosen. Maybe people really could change, given the right environment and enough time. The consulting contract ended after 3 months. Derek thanked me for the opportunity and said he had learned more in that period than in his last 5 years at the firm. He didn't ask for a permanent position, which I respected. Some doors open only briefly, and wisdom is knowing when to walk through them. I realized that success wasn't about proving Derek wrong or making anyone regret doubting me. It was about building a life where their opinions no longer controlled my choices. The girl who cried in that parking garage had grown into someone who could offer grace to the man who hurt her. That night, I sat in my warehouse office long after everyone left. I looked around at the desks, the whiteboards covered in ideas, the small kitchen where my team gathered each morning. None of this existed 2 years ago. All of it started with a rejection I thought would break me. I whispered a quiet thank you to the woman I used to be, the one who kept building even when no one believed. The acquisition offer arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between routine emails and calendar invites. A tech conglomerate wanted to buy my company for $28 million. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. 3 years ago, I sold a side project for $4 million and thought I had won the lottery. Now someone was offering me generational wealth, and my first instinct was to close the laptop. I didn't tell anyone for 3 days. Not Elena, not my sister, not my mother who called every Sunday without fail. I carried the secret like a stone in my chest, heavy and impossible to ignore. At night, I ran the numbers obsessively, calculating what that money could mean for everyone I loved. By morning, I convinced myself the decision was obvious. Then doubt crept back in. My sister Maya finally noticed something was off during our week. She had a gift for reading my silences, a skill developed through 34 years of sisterhood. She set down her fork and waited, not pushing, just present. I told her everything in one breathless rush, watching her eyes widen with each detail. She asked what I wanted to do. I laughed because it was the one question I couldn't answer. Selling made logical sense. The money would secure my family's future for generations. But keeping the company meant protecting something I had built from nothing, something that reflected who I had become. Maya nodded slowly, then said something that surprised me. She told me about a conversation she'd had with our mother the previous. Mom had been sorting through old photographs, reminiscing about our childhood. She mentioned how I used to build elaborate structures with blocks, then knock them down just to build something different. Maya said Mom always knew I wasn't meant to hold on to things. I was meant to keep creating. That night, I couldn't sleep again. but for different reasons than before. I thought about the woman I was when I sold my first company versus who I had become. Back then, selling felt like escape, like finally being seen after years of invisibility. Now selling felt like something else entirely. It felt like choosing safety over possibility. I met with the acquisition team the following Monday. Their offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, everything polished and precise. The executives wore expensive suits and spoke in confident projections about synergy and market expansion. They painted a beautiful picture of my company's future under their umbrella. I smiled and nodded and felt absolutely nothing. The lead negotiator was a woman named Catherine, maybe 10 years older than me, with silver streaks in her dark hair. She had built her career in mergers and acquisitions, shepherding deals worth hundreds of millions. During a break, she found me by the coffee station and asked a question that cut straight through the corporate performance. She asked if I actually wanted to sell or if I was just curious about my market value. I blinked, caught off guard by her directness. She smiled and said she'd seen that look before. Founders who scheduled meetings to feel validated, not to make deals. She wasn't judging, just observing. I appreciated her honesty more than any of the polished presentation. I admitted I didn't know what I wanted. The words felt dangerous to say aloud in that building, surrounded by people whose jobs depended on deals closing. Catherine nodded and told me to take my time. She said the worst acquisitions she'd witnessed were ones where founders sold before they were ready. The money was never enough to compensate for the regret. I drove home through rush hour traffic, Catherine's words echoing in my mind. Ready. What did that even mean? I had built something successful, proved myself to every doubter, created jobs for people I cared about. What else was there to accomplish? The question haunted me because I didn't have an answer. Elena sensed the shift when I returned to the office. She cornered me in the kitchen and asked point blank if we were being acquired. I told her about the offer, watching her face cycle through shock, excitement, and something that looked like grief. She asked what the deal would mean for the team. I realized I hadn't thought about that enough. We spent hours that evening talking through scenarios. If I sold, the new owners might restructure everything, different leadership, different culture, different priorities. The family we had built could scatter within months. Elena admitted she'd received recruitment offers from other companies, but had ignored them because she believed in what we were creating together. Her loyalty made the decision harder, not easier. I wanted to protect my team, but I also knew that holding on to something out of guilt wasn't fair to anyone. Elena deserved a leader who was fully committed, not someone staying out of obligation. I told her I needed more time, and she gave me a hug instead of an answer. That weekend, I visited my mother in the small house where I grew up. The neighborhood had changed around her, new developments, unfamiliar faces, but she refused to move. She said the walls held too many memories to leave behind. I found her in the garden, hands deep in soil, completely at peace. I told her about the acquisition offer while we planted tomatoes together. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of acknowledgement. When I finished, she wiped her hands on her apron and looked at me with those eyes that always saw too much. She said money was a tool, not a destination. She reminded me of my father, gone now almost 15 years, who worked the same factory job for 3 decades without complaint. He never built anything that bore his name, but he built a family that loved him. She asked which kind of legacy mattered more to me. I cried in her garden for the first time since his funeral. The tears surprised me, coming from somewhere deeper than the acquisition. I was grieving something I couldn't name. Maybe the relentless pressure I put on myself. Maybe the exhaustion of constantly proving my worth. My mother held me and didn't say a word. I returned to the city on Sunday evening with something resembling clarity. The question wasn't whether to sell, it was why I had built the company in the first place. I started it to prove I could, to transform rejection into triumph. But somewhere along the way, it became about something bigger than my wounded ego. Monday morning, I gathered my team in the warehouse conference room. I told them about the acquisition offer, watching their faces shift as they processed the implications. Then I told them what I had decided. I was declining the offer. We were going to keep building, together, without a corporate parent looking over our shoulders. The relief in the room was almost physical. Elena actually laughed, a sound I rarely heard from her. The junior developers exchanged looks of disbelief, then started talking excitedly about projects they wanted to launch. I realized I had underestimated how much this place meant to people beyond myself. I called Catherine that afternoon to deliver my decision. She wasn't surprised. She said she had seen it coming during our coffee conversation. Before hanging up, she offered me some advice. She said the hardest part of building something meaningful wasn't the early struggle. It was choosing to stay when leaving would be so much easier. That evening, I sat alone in my office watching the sunset paint the warehouse windows gold. I thought about all the versions of myself that had led to this moment: the overlooked employee, the secret builder, the accidental millionaire, the reluctant founder. Each one had something to teach me about what I truly value. I texted my sister a single sentence: "I'm keeping it." She responded with 17 celebration emojis and a voice message of her screaming. My mother sent a quieter reply the next morning. Just a photo of the tomatoes we planted, already reaching toward the light. $28 million sat on a table, and I walked away. Some people would call that foolish. But I understood something they didn't. The company wasn't just a business anymore. It was proof that I could choose myself, again and again, even when the easier path was right in front of me. 6 months after declining the acquisition, my company hit its first real crisis. A competitor launched a nearly identical platform at half our price point. Within weeks, our user growth flatlined. Cancellation emails flooded our inbox daily. I watched the metrics decline and felt that old familiar fear creeping back, the terror of building something beautiful only to watch it crumble in my hand. Alina worked around the clock trying to identify what made us different enough to survive. Our team brainstormed new features, better pricing models, partnership opportunities. Nothing felt right. Every idea seemed reactive, desperate. I started waking at 3 in the morning, unable to quiet the voice asking if I had made the wrong choice turning down $28 million. My sister noticed the change immediately. She said I looked like I was disappearing, shrinking back into someone I used to be. I snapped at her, defensive, then apologized an hour later through tears. The pressure was doing something to me I didn't like. I was becoming sharp-edged, impatient, quick to assume the worst. A former mentor reached out during the worst of it. Diane had run her own agency for 20 years before selling it to retire early. She heard through mutual contacts that I was struggling and invited me to lunch at her favorite restaurant. I almost declined, too proud to admit I needed help. Something in her voice changed my mind. She listened to everything without offering immediate solutions. Then she told me about her own near collapse, 15 years earlier, when a recession nearly destroyed her business. She described lying awake, calculating how many weeks until bankruptcy, drafting layoff notices she prayed she wouldn't send. Her company survived, but she never forgot how close she came. The survival, she said, required one painful she had to stop trying to be everything to everyone. Her agency was mediocre at 10 services, but exceptional at 2. She cut everything else and rebuilt around her genuine strength. Clients left, revenue dropped short-term, but within a year she had a waiting list. I drove home thinking about what we were actually exceptional at. Not features or pricing, those could always be copied. What we had was something harder to replicate. Our platform was built by creators for creators. Every design choice reflected real pain points because I had lived them myself. That authenticity was impossible to manufacture. The next morning, I called an emergency team meeting. I shared Diane's advice and proposed something radical. Instead of competing on features, we would compete on community. We would build direct relationships with our users, create spaces for them to connect, make them feel like partners rather than customers. Elena looked skeptical, but intrigued. We launched a pilot program inviting 50 users into a private feedback group. I hosted weekly video calls, listening to their frustrations and dreams. I learned more in those sessions than in months of analytics reports. These weren't abstract data points. They were real people trying to build something meaningful, just like me. Their struggles mirrored my own journey. One user, a freelance illustrator named Marcus, described feeling invisible in a crowded marketplace. He created beautiful work, but couldn't break through the noise. His words transported me back to that conference room, those smirks, that crushing sense of being overlooked. I understood his pain at a cellular level. I started featuring users like Marcus in our marketing. Instead of polished testimonials, we shared raw stories, their setbacks, breakthroughs, ongoing struggles. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People connected with authenticity in ways they never connected with professional copy. Our community doubled in 2 months without spending $1 on advertising. The competitor who had terrified me began hemorrhaging users. Their platform was cheaper, but soulless, built by people who saw creators as revenue streams rather than human beings. Our users started referring friends, writing unsolicited reviews, defending us in online forums. We hadn't just survived. We had discovered something more valuable than features. Elena pulled me aside after a particularly successful launch event. She said she finally understood why I had turned down the acquisition. A corporate parent would have optimized for profit, stripped away everything that made us different. What we were building couldn't exist inside a machine designed for efficiency. It needed space to breathe. That conversation meant more to me than any revenue milestone. Elena had been with me since the beginning, had seen every failure and victory. Her belief felt like validation from someone who truly understood the cost. I told her she was the best decision I ever made. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Spring arrived, and with it an unexpected invitation. A major business conference wanted me to deliver a keynote about building authentic brands. The audience would include executives from companies worth billions. 3 years ago, I couldn't convince my own manager I deserved a promotion. Now strangers were paying to hear my thoughts. I almost said no. Public speaking terrified me in ways that business challenges never did. Standing on stage, exposed, with hundreds of eyes judging every word, it triggered something primal. But my therapist, whom I had started seeing 6 months earlier, suggested the fear was exactly why I should accept. I spent 3 weeks writing and rewriting my speech. Every draft felt either too boastful or too humble, too polished or too raw. Finally, I abandoned the script entirely and decided to simply tell my story. The promotion meeting, the laughter, the midnight project, the offer I almost missed because I had stopped believing in myself. The morning of the keynote, I stood backstage fighting nausea. I could hear the crowd murmuring, thousands of conversations blending into white noise. My hands trembled visibly. Then I thought about Marcus, about every overlooked creator in our community, about the woman I was 3 years ago. I walked onto that stage for all of us. I spoke for 40 minutes without notes. I described feeling small in rooms designed to make me feel that way. I talked about building something in secret because I was afraid to want it openly. I admitted that success hadn't erased my insecurities. It had just given me better tools to manage them. The silence in that auditorium felt different from the conference room. It felt like recognition. The applause started slowly, then built into something that vibrated through my chest. People stood. I saw faces I didn't recognize wiping tears. Afterward, strangers approached to share their own stories of rejection and reinvention. A woman my mother's age said she was finally going to start the business she had been postponing for decades. That conversation alone made every terrified moment worthwhile. The keynote generated attention I wasn't prepared for. Interview requests, podcast invitations, speaking offers from around the country. My inbox became unmanageable. Elena hired someone just to filter opportunities. I felt the ground shifting beneath me again, my identity expanding beyond the warehouse walls I had grown to love. My mother watched a recording of the speech and called me. She said my father would have been proud that he always knew I had words inside me waiting to escape. She asked if I remembered building those block towers as a child, how I would narrate elaborate stories about who lived inside them. I had forgotten. She never did. That night, I walked through the warehouse alone after everyone left. I touched the desks, the whiteboards, the coffee machine we had finally replaced. Each object held memories of late nights and early breakthroughs, of arguments that made us stronger, and celebrations that reminded us why we started. This place had become sacred ground. I thought about what came next and felt no fear, only curiosity. The competitor who once threatened us was now struggling to survive. Our community was thriving. My voice had reached people I would never meet. Whatever challenges waited around the corner, I would face them as someone who had already survived the worst thing, being dismissed by people whose approval I no longer needed. I locked the warehouse door and stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the building that held my dream. Somewhere in this city, another woman was working on something afraid to believe it could matter. I hoped she would keep going. I hoped he would find out, like I did, that the only permission she needed was her own. 2 years passed faster than I thought possible. My company now employed 43 people across 2 offices. We had expanded into markets I never imagined reaching when I started coding alone in my apartment. The warehouse where everything began felt smaller every time I visited, though Alina insisted nothing had physically changed. She said I was the one who had grown too big for the space. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday, printed on heavy cream cardstock. My former employer was celebrating their 50th anniversary with a gala downtown. Someone had added my name to the guest list, probably assuming enough time had passed to erase old wounds. I held the invitation over the trash can for a full minute before setting it on my desk instead. Maya thought I was crazy for even considering attendance. She reminded me of the parking garage tears, the months of rebuilding my confidence, the countless therapy sessions processing that rejection. Why voluntarily return to a place that had caused so much pain? I didn't have a good answer, only a strange pull I couldn't explain. Elena offered to accompany me if I decided to go. She had never met Derek or anyone from my former life, knew them only through my stories. Having her there would feel like bringing proof, evidence that the woman they dismissed had built something extraordinary. I wasn't sure if that motivation was healthy or petty. My therapist asked what I hoped to gain from attending. I sat with the question for our entire session, circling possibilities without landing on truth. Closure felt too simple. Revenge felt too small. Finally, I admitted I wanted to walk through those doors as someone completely unrecognizable from the woman who had walked out defeated 5 years earlier. I bought a new dress for the occasion, something I rarely did anymore. The boutique owner recognized me from magazine features and offered a discount I politely declined. I chose deep emerald green, elegant, without trying too hard. Standing before my mirror the night of the gala, I barely recognized the reflection staring back at me. Elena picked me up in her new car, a practical sedan she'd purchased with her profit-sharing bonus. We drove downtown making nervous jokes, neither acknowledging the weight of what we were approaching. The venue glowed against the night sky, windows blazing with golden light. Valets in crisp uniforms opened doors for guests wearing watches worth more than my first apartment. The ballroom overwhelmed my senses immediately. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, a string quartet playing something classical I should have recognized. I spotted former colleagues scattered throughout the crowd. Older now, some successful, others wearing the same hungry expressions I remembered from conference rooms. Derek found me before I found him. He crossed the ballroom with purpose, weaving through clusters of conversation. His hair had grayed significantly at the temples, and he moved with less confidence than I remembered. When he reached me, he extended his hand and said he was genuinely glad I came. His eyes confirmed he meant it. We talked for 20 minutes near the bar, Elena hovering protectively nearby. Derek had left the company 2 years after our consulting project ended, started his own small firm, struggled through a difficult first year. He spoke about failure with humility I had never witnessed from him before. Something had broken and rebuilt inside him too. He introduced me to his wife, a warm woman named Patricia, who worked as a pediatric nurse. She knew my story. Derek had apparently shared it during his own career transition. She thanked me for giving her husband a second chance when I had every reason to refuse. I felt something shift in my chest, old resentment dissolving into something lighter. The company's CEO took the stage to deliver remarks about legacy and innovation. I recognized maybe half of what he referenced, having left before most recent developments occurred. Watching from the back of the ballroom, I felt like a ghost visiting a life that no longer belonged to me. The feeling wasn't sad, just strange. A tap on my shoulder interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a young woman, maybe 25, clutching a drink she clearly wasn't enjoying. She introduced herself as a junior analyst who had read every interview I'd ever given. She said I was the reason she hadn't quit during her first terrible year at this company. Her name was Priya, and her story echoed mine with painful precision. Overlooked in meetings, ideas credited to louder colleagues, a promotion passed over for someone less qualified. She was building something on the side too. A financial literacy app for first-generation immigrants like her parents. She whispered about it like a secret too precious to speak aloud. I gave her my card and told her to email me Monday morning. Her eyes widened like I had offered something impossible. I remembered that feeling, the shock of being seen by someone who mattered. I told her the only thing I wish someone had told me years ago, that her voice had value whether this company recognized it or not. Elena found me afterward, slightly emotional from watching the exchange. She said she finally understood why I needed to come tonight. It wasn't about proving anything to Derek or the company. It was about finding Priya, about closing a loop I didn't know was still open. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We left the gala before the dancing started, stepping into cool night air that felt like relief. I removed my heels on the sidewalk, not caring who saw. Elena laughed and did the same. We walked barefoot to her car, two women who had built something meaningful together, neither of us the person we were when we started. The drive home was quiet, but comfortable. I watched city lights blur past my window, thinking about Priya and Derek, and all the versions of myself scattered across this city's buildings. Every office held someone feeling invisible, building something in secret, waiting for permission they didn't need. I couldn't save them all, but I could keep telling my story. Monday morning, Priya's email arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. She had stayed up all weekend refining her pitch, terrified I would forget my offer or change my mind. Her app was impressive, her vision even more so. I forwarded her information to 3 investors I trusted and copied Elena on a meeting request. 6 weeks later, Priya secured her first round of funding. She called me crying from her apartment, the same way I had called Maya years earlier. I listened to her disbelief transform into joy, remembering how that felt, the moment when dreams stop being fantasies and start being plans. I told her this was just the beginning. My mother asked, during our Sunday call, if I ever regretted not taking the $28 million. I laughed and told her the honest truth. Some weeks I did, usually when something broke or someone quit or the market shifted in unexpected direction. But regret lived in moments, while purpose lived in years. I had chosen the longer timeline. She said my father would have said something similar, though with fewer words. He believed that building things mattered more than owning things. That legacy lived in what you taught, not what you kept. I asked if she thought I was finally becoming the person he saw in me. She paused, then said I had surpassed anything he imagined. The company celebrated its 5th anniversary with a party in the warehouse where everything began. We had long outgrown the space, but Elena insisted on returning to our roots for this milestone. Former employees flew in from across the country. Priya brought her growing team. Even my mother made the trip, standing proudly beside decorations she had helped Maya assemble. I gave a brief speech thanking everyone who had believed when belief was irrational. I mentioned the promotion meeting only once, framing it as the rejection that became a gift. The room was full of people who understood that failure was simply redirection, that closed doors often protected us from rooms where we never belonged. After the party, I sat alone in my old corner office, now used for storage. I thought about the woman who once sat here terrified of spreadsheets and skeptical managers. She couldn't have imagined this life, the company, the impact, the freedom. I whispered a thank you to her for not giving up, for building something when no one was watching, for believing she deserved more.